We have Donald Rumsfeld on with us now. His new book, Rumsfeld Rules, Leadership, Lessons in Business, Politics, War, and Life. How are you doing, sir?
Excellent. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm trying to... we're trying to think if there's been anything that has come up since you have left office, and none of us can think of anything that we have changed our mind on you. We have been fan of yours
thank you.
From the beginning, because you're one of the few people that actually say what you mean and mean what you say, and you stand by it. There's no mealy mouth about you. And
well, thank you. One of my rules in my new book is that dogs don't bark at parked cars. So, if you do something, somebody's not going to like it, and you have to be comfortable with that, and life goes on. So you were talking about these problems that the White House is coping with, the crises they've got, and when you think about the IRS and the feeling that the American people have when they see the government being turned against them, I think that is something that is so unacceptable in our society.
Yes. Well, wasn't the government with Benghazi really kind of turned against the people too? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't recall a time in American history where we had the capability of saving people and we said, let them die. Abandon.
Well, we lost 4 public servants, and the British saw the threat and pulled their people out. And our people saw the threat and reported back that they needed greater security, and they didn't receive it. And then once that happened and they were under attack, it appears that there were capabilities that might have been used. But I think the hearings that Congress is having are very important. That was enormously emotional witnesses before the Congressional Committee, I think it was last week.
When your book is Rumsfeld's Rules, and it's all about the rules of leadership. And this is where I think we have a real problem here, a real disconnect. The president has Pentagon, Department of State, Treasury, IRS, CIA, EPA, Department of Justice Department, and the FBI, all embroiled in scandal right now. And he says he wasn't aware of any of them. He wasn't there with Benghazi. He left 5:00 in the afternoon. He left, and Panetta testified that the president wasn't involved. The president didn't call. He let them make all the decisions. I mean, at best, isn't this a complete vacuum of leadership?
Well, it is. I mean, somebody in the White House characterized his leadership role overseas as leading from behind. In this case, he's leading from behind even internally in the White House. And the only thing he's really stepped up and taken responsibility for was SEAL Team 6.
Yes.
And the killing of Osama bin Laden.
Well, I want to give, to be fair, and I'm not a fan of his at all, to be fair, he's the president. He had to make the final call. But he's the president with Benghazi as well. Is it possible, in all of your vast years of experience, is it possible that the president allows in that situation everyone else to make all of the decisions and go to bed and not have anybody in the White House even call and check up and just say, brief me in the morning. I'll see you in about 15 hours or so. Is that possible?
I've worked closly with 4 presidents, and I can't imagine that situation in any of those presidencies, from Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, or George W. Bush.
Secretary Rumsfeld, it's also been alleged by this administration that without, I guess, really clear-cut information of everything going on in the ground, that there's no way they can send forces in to help. We heard that from Panetta, and I think Gates as well, that we didn't know exactly what was going on the ground, so we're not going to send forces in. Is that true in your experience? Is that how the military operates, that they have to know everything going on the ground before they send forces in there?
Well, no, of course not. I didn't hear what they had to say, so I can't really speak about what Bob Gates or Leon Panetta might have said. But
that is what they said. They said we can't go in unless we know everything that's happening on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, we had people on the ground who were reporting back to Washington as to what was taking place.
Right.
And I think the congressional hearings are terribly important because there are a lot of people suggesting that there was a reaction force that had been in Stuttgart that had been moved down to Italy, and that there were some capabilities in Tripoli that conceivably could have been moved over. Now, I've been out of government, and I can't speak to that, and I'm going to wait until I see what the hearings have to say about it, because I think they're going to have those people come up and talk about it, because it's important. And unlike what Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said, she said, what's it matter at this point? Well, it does matter. It's important, it seems to me, when you have people killed, and we hadn't provided the kind of protection for them, and I don't know precisely what we could have done, but we certainly have a lot of capabilities, and conceivably something might have been done.
Your book is not, it's not about, it's not a history book about, your time in the White House. It is the rules about business, politics, war, and life. So and that really is the problem that we have in America, in our own families, in our communities, in the White House, everything, is that we have such a lack of real leadership that has ethics. Everything is squishy, and it's all about, did you win? Did you get the money? Did you get your way? What is the biggest lesson we need to turn not our economy and not our country, but the freedom of mankind to be able to save it? What do you think is the one lesson that you would say, if America could learn this one lesson, please do this? What would it be?
Well, I remember once watching a hearing in Congress, and it was the historian David McCullough, and he was asked a question something like that, and he said, not surprisingly, that we should teach history in our schools. This country of ours has a great history, and we're rooted in things that are important, and it's been an experiment that the world has been able to see and experience and comment on. And we as a nation, I think, it's important that we succeed, and we're not going to succeed if we model our economy on Western Europe, a failed model. We're not going to succeed if we think that we have to apologize to the world. We have values that are different from a lot of other countries, and to the extent we create a leadership vacuum in the world, that vacuum is going to be filled by people with values notably different than us.
So if somebody wants to change their life today, and they're saying, you know what, I'm going to lead, where do they start?
Well, you start by deciding what your goal may be. What is it that you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? And leadership is persuasion. It's as my uncle used to say, persuasion is a two-edged sword. Reason and emotion plunge it deep. And if you know where you're going and you plant a standard out there and say to people in a persuasive way, this is important. It's important for you. It's important for me. And then are steady on course towards that standard down the road, people follow, people care, people understand that, and then you're able to calibrate that. Think of what Ronald Reagan did when they asked him what his policy with the Soviet Union was in communism. He said, my policy is we win, they lose. That had clarity.
Well, so isn't then the president, by that definition, is a great leader?
Which president?
This one.
In what sense?
He has set the standard. I'm going to fundamentally transform the United States of America. And he is unwavering from that. I mean, I don't agree with him. I don't like it. But he has not stepped off that path since day one.
Well, in another sense, it's quite the opposite if you think about it. There are people out there that are raising money and recruiting people to go out and kill innocent men, women, and children, radical Islamists, whose goal in life is to defeat the idea, the concept of a nation state and impose a caliphate. And the fact that this president will not even acknowledge that,
but
and calls the Fort Hood killings workplace violence. And sends up cabinet officers who aren't even willing to mention that there's such a thing as Islamism.
Former Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Secretary, I have to tell you, I am amazed that you would say that. I was torn apart because I said what the Muslim Brotherhood wants is a reestablishment of the caliphate. And every Republican, Democrat, didn't matter, all said that is a pipe dream, conspiracy theory, old-timey think that has nothing to do with anything. And now we have a Boston bombing, and they don't even want to admit that they want to say that was homegrown, a couple of guys who just went off the beaten path, and they won't admit to any of this. How can we possibly survive if the only time I've rarely ever heard anybody of any importance talk about a caliphate is right now with you?
Well, if people think about the war on terror and pretend there isn't such a thing and that it doesn't exist, or that it's something that we can win with bullets, and it's not. It's not like World War II or World War I or Vietnam. It's more like the Cold War. You have to be willing to compete in the ideological space. And if you're not willing to even identify the enemy, it seems to me you don't have a chance of prevailing. And the overwhelming majority of Muslims are not Islamists. They're not radical. They're not supporting terrorism. And we have to be able to understand that and not be afraid that people will say, well, you're against that religion if you say anything like that, which is not true. We are a country that believes in freedom of religion, and we've demonstrated that. But I don't see how we can prevail like we did in the Cold War over decades against this enemy unless we're willing to identify the enemy.
If we couldn't have said the word Nazi
exactly
in World War II.
Yeah, or communist.
Right. You were, in the 1960s, you were in Congress when the Freedom of Information Act was passed.
Yes. I was a co-sponsor.
So you are into open information. Eric Holder just came out and said what he was dealing with is the most dangerous, one of the three biggest leaks that he has seen since 1973. And that's why they had to tap all of the phones of all of the reporters at the Associated Press for months. I've never seen anything like that. Two questions. One, if this is one of the biggest three, is there any way that the president wouldn't have been informed that leak was going on and what they were doing to find the leaker? And two,
it's inconceivable.
Mm-hmm. Inconceivable.
He'd have to be informed. If his attorney general says this is one of the most serious, 1, 2, or 3 most serious things he's ever seen by way of damage to our national security in terms of a leak, the president would unquestionably have to be informed.
And would he then be informed on? Because I know if I were the president, I'd say, well, what are we doing about it?
Yes, exactly.
And he would know about what they were doing about it.
And I guess at some point we'll know what it was, what was leaked, and what the damage was, and we'll be able to make our own judgments about it. I would defer coming to a conclusion until I have more information.
Would you think that tapping the phones of an entire news organization would be reasonable on anything that you have faced in the past?
Well, you began talking about the Freedom of Information Act, and there is a national security exemption in there, needless to say. There has to be, so that the American people can be protected.
Right, I understand that.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is the government said, give us your source on this. And the AP said no. And so the government said, okay. And they went and they tapped all of the reporters' phones. Is there something that you have faced?
Well, there are procedures under FISA where a executive branch official that feels the need to do something like that can go to a so-called FISA judge and discuss it and have.
But do you believe that you have faced anything where you felt you were could have been authorized to tap the phones of all of the reporters in any news agency?
I have never seen anything myself like that. Nor have I ever suggested anyone do something like that.
Wow.
Where do you think we, if we don't change course on personal leadership in our own lives, because I think, quite honestly, a lot of us left the tough decisions up to past administrations, up to you guys. You guys take care of it. We trust you. Our own financial decisions and everything else. Where do we end up if we don't act? If we don't change our course?
Well, you hate to even think of the thought that there could be a tipping point, but I suppose in many things in life there can be a tipping point. I'm 81 in July, years old, and every time I've seen things get bad, I've seen the American people get out of their chairs and change their priorities, and if the pendulum goes too far in one way, they push it back. And I've always had a lot of confidence in that, and I'm from the Midwest. I'm basically an optimistic person, and I still have confidence in this country of ours. But I have to be realistic. I think it's conceivable you could get to a tipping point where there weren't enough people ready to push it back, and that's why I mentioned the comment about reading history and having our schools teach civics and the responsibility that each of us have to help guide and direct the course of our country.
Former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. The name of the book is Rumsfeld's Rules, Leadership Lesson in Business, Politics, War, and Life. Thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you very much.
God bless.
Good to be with you.
You bet. Bye-bye.
The guy is just so brilliant. And
I love him.
How much do you miss him now? I mean,
I've always
after
missed
listening
him.
to him for 15 minutes, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, what I liked about him
Take
is
you back in the worst days of the Bush administration.
Here's the thing. I liked him because even if you disagreed with him, you knew exactly where he stood.
No question.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The guy was fearless.
And the other thing is about the Bush administration, say what you will, and I did because I had a lot of problems with him. I never once believed they didn't love America. I never once believed they didn't love the Constitution. I never once believed that they would let Americans die when they're under siege.
I do believe that they are big government progressives. And now, Donald Rumsfeld, I'm not sure. But I do believe that the Bushes are big government globalist and progressives. They do believe in a concentration of power. And I do believe that they had a very radically different look at where America was, where America was headed, with Mexico. So the border.
Definitely.
But I do believe that they thought, they would never say it, and this was my problem. They just thought differently, that this was a better thing for America, where I don't think, this guy has said he's going to transform America into some transformation means, caterpillar, butterfly. I'm sorry. But when there's a butterfly, there is no caterpillar left. That's metamorphosis. That is transformation. And nobody was trying to transform America. They were, quite honestly, the problem with the Republican progressives is they try to spread America. They try to make every place America. They try to say, we're going to nation build. No, we're not going to nation build. Stop it. Take care of us. Let's free people by making this the place that everybody wants to come to. The best and the brightest want to come to. That's the way you transform the world.
It's interesting because they had, we talk about all the problems that, a lot of us had with Bush. Many of them came after Rumsfeld left. And there's a HBO documentary recently talking about the world. I think it was called The World According to Dick Cheney. And they interviewed Cheney. But they went through, and their case sort of seemed to be that Cheney's influence was large on the administration, and they really worked closely together until the Rumsfeld forcing out. Rumsfeld being forced out was one of the first things Bush did on his own. And from there on, the relationship was strained, and there was less influence from Cheney. And you really look back at it, not everything, the border being a good example, but not everything that was bad happened after Rumsfeld, but a lot of things that, really frustrated conservatives happened after that particular incident. And looking back, that may have been a catalyst to a lot of the negatives that came out of the Bush administration.